Don't let him drink that. The words never made it out of Nia Brooks's mouth. They stayed trapped somewhere between instinct and fear as she stepped across the marble floor of the Whitestone Grand Ballroom with a silver tray balanced carefully against her palm. Around her, the room glittered with the kind of wealth that made people whisper instead of laugh. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls. A string quartet played low beneath the soft hum of billion-dollar conversations. Men in tailored tuxedos traded handshakes worth more than most neighborhoods in Chicago. Women in black velvet gowns smiled with the careful precision of people used to cameras. And seated at the center of it all was Adrian Whitmore, 41 years old, founder and CEO of Whitmore Dynamics, America's youngest biotech billionaire. The kind of man financial magazines called visionary and former employees called terrifying. Adrian sat alone at the head of the private table, one hand resting near a cut crystal whiskey glass filled with amber liquid and melting ice. He looked untouched by the noise around him. Cold gray eyes, sharp jawline, calm posture. Everything about him felt controlled, measured, expensive. Nia had seen powerful men before. Senators, athletes, hedge fund executives who snapped their fingers instead of saying excuse me. But Adrian Whitmore was different. Men like him didn't enter rooms. They owned them. Nia moved quietly between tables refilling glasses while invisible conversations floated around her like smoke. Stock prices, acquisition, FDA approval. Nobody looked directly at her unless they needed something. That was the rule in places like this. You carried the tray. You disappeared. But then she saw it. Not the drink itself. The ice. One cube near the top had started dissolving too quickly, releasing tiny cloudy streaks into the whiskey. Strange. Wrong. Nia slowed her steps. Her pulse tightened. She glanced toward the bar. The bartender she'd seen earlier was gone. In his place stood a man she didn't recognize, adjusting his cufflinks and avoiding eye contact. A chill crawled up her spine. 3 years ago, her father had died after being given the wrong medication in a crowded emergency room. Everyone said it was an accident. Nia remembered the metallic smell. The nurse who looked nervous. The way nobody listened when a 13-year-old black girl said something felt off. Since then, she noticed details other people ignored. Tiny things. The kind that saved lives. Adrian reached for the glass. Nia reacted before her brain caught up. In one smooth motion, she stepped forward and switched the whiskey glass with another from her tray. Crystal touched crystal with a soft click. Silence hit the table instantly. Adrian looked up slowly, his expression sharpening like a knife being unsheathed. Around him, conversations stopped mid-sentence. One investor frowned. Another guest muttered, "What the hell is she doing?" Nia kept her face calm even as her heartbeat pounded against her ribs. Adrian stared at the new glass in front of him, then at her. "Did you just touch my drink?" His voice wasn't loud. That made it worse. Security near the ballroom entrance immediately turned toward them. Nia swallowed carefully. Every instinct told her to apologize and walk away. Girls like her did not interrupt men like him. Not in rooms like this. But something inside her refused to move. Adrian stood slowly from his chair, 6'3" in a black tuxedo that looked stitched directly onto power itself. The room watched him the way people watch thunderstorms through glass windows. Dangerous. Beautiful. Unpredictable. "Answer me," he said. Nia looked directly into his eyes for the first time all night. "You shouldn't drink that." The ballroom did not breathe. It simply stared. Adrian Whitmore held Nia's gaze without blinking, one hand still resting beside the untouched whiskey glass, as if the entire room had frozen around that single moment. Somewhere near the stage, the violinist stopped playing mid-note. A champagne flute clinked softly against marble. Then came the whispers. Did she say poison? Is this some kind of stunt? Who hired her? Nia could feel every eye in the room cutting across her skin like cold rain, but she kept her posture straight. Fear was dangerous in places like this. Powerful people could smell it. Adrian's expression darkened slightly, not with panic, but annoyance. The kind of irritation wealthy men carried when reality interrupted their evening. "Explain yourself," he said calmly. Nia glanced once toward the bar again. The unfamiliar bartender was gone. Vanished. That tightened the knot in her stomach even further. "Sir," she said carefully, "I think something is wrong with the drink." A few guests laughed under their breath. One older investor in a navy tuxedo leaned back in his chair, and smirked openly. Based on what? A waitress intuition. More laughter followed, thin and cruel. Nia ignored it. Adrian did not laugh. He studied her instead. There was something unsettling about how calm she looked. Most employees would already be apologizing, trembling, begging not to lose their jobs. But Nia Brooks stood there with both hands steady against the silver tray, like she had already accepted whatever came next. Security approached quickly. Two men in black suits moved beside Adrian's chair, while guests quietly lifted phones beneath the tablecloths. One guard reached for Nia's wrist. "Step away from the table, ma'am." Adrian raised one finger slightly. The guard stopped immediately. That single gesture told everyone exactly how much authority Adrian Whitmore carried in the world. "No," Adrian said quietly. "Let her talk." Nia swallowed. Her throat felt dry now. "The ice cube dissolved too fast," she explained. "And there was a metallic smell near the rim." Another guest scoffed loudly. "You can smell poison now." "Enough," Adrian interrupted without raising his voice. Silence returned instantly. He picked up the original whiskey glass slowly, studying the amber liquid beneath the chandelier light. The melting ice floated quietly against the crystal walls. Nothing looked unusual. Nothing looked deadly. That was the terrifying part. Adrian had spent his entire life around risk. Corporate warfare. Lawsuits. Investors waiting for weakness. But danger usually announced itself loudly in his world. This felt different. Invisible. A woman near the end of the table crossed her arms impatiently. "Adrian, this is absurd. We are stopping a $700 million acquisition because a server watches crime documentaries." A few guests chuckled nervously. Adrian remained focused on the glass. Then he looked back at Nia. "If you are wrong," he said, "you understand what this looks like." She nodded once. "Yes, sir. And if you are right." Nia hesitated for the first time. Not because she feared him, because she knew exactly what kind of people plan things like this. "Then somebody here wanted you dead." The words landed harder than anyone expected. Chairs shifted. Faces changed. A stockbroker near the stage suddenly stopped smiling. Across the ballroom, one man quietly reached for his phone and walked toward the exit. Nia noticed immediately. Adrian noticed her noticing. That was when something subtle changed in his expression. Not trust. Not yet. But attention. Real attention. For the first time all evening, Adrian Whitmore was no longer looking through her. He was looking directly at her. And somewhere deep beneath the polished surface of the white stone grand ballroom, panic had quietly entered the room. The man heading toward the exit moved too fast for someone trying to look calm. Nia noticed it immediately. So did Adrian. The ballroom remained wrapped in stunned silence as the stranger adjusted his tuxedo sleeve and slipped between tables without making eye contact with anyone. That was the thing about guilt. It hated bright rooms. Adrian slowly set the whiskey glass back onto the table. The soft click against polished walnut sounded louder than the orchestra ever had. "Stop him," Nia said suddenly. One of the investors rolled his eyes. "This is getting ridiculous." But Adrian did not hesitate. "Security," he said coldly, never taking his eyes off the man near the exit. "Do not let him leave." The room erupted all at once. Chairs scraped against marble floors. Guests stood halfway from their seats, trying to understand whether they were witnessing corporate drama or attempted murder. Two security guards moved quickly through the crowd, while the stranger near the doors abruptly changed direction toward the service hallway. That alone told everyone enough. Panic spread quietly beneath. Designer watches and diamond earrings. The violinists had completely stopped playing now. Even the chandeliers seemed too bright. Adrian remained standing beside the untouched drink, shoulders squared, expression unreadable. But inside, something had shifted. He could feel it. Moments earlier, Nia Brooks had simply been another invisible employee in a black uniform carrying expensive alcohol to powerful people who barely noticed her existence. Now she was the only reason he was still breathing normally. One guard suddenly spoke into his earpiece near the hallway entrance. Another guest whispered, "Oh my God." Across the ballroom, a woman dropped her champagne flute onto the carpet. Nia stayed perfectly still despite the storm growing around her. Years of being underestimated had taught her something valuable. The loudest people in the room were rarely the most observant. Adrian looked at her carefully again. 26 maybe. Tired eyes but alert. Calm posture. No performance. No desperation. Just certainty. "How did you know?" he asked quietly. Nia hesitated. She hated questions like that because the truth always sounded unbelievable to people born into comfort. My father died from a medication mix-up when I was 13, she said softly. Everyone said it was an accident until we learned somebody switched labels to cover inventory theft. Adrian listened without interrupting. Around them, security radio chatter crackled faintly while guests whispered behind raised hands. Nia continued carefully. After that, I started paying attention to details people ignore. Smells, reactions, timing. She glanced briefly at the whiskey glass. That ice cube was wrong. Adrian followed her eyes toward the drink. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar crawl beneath his controlled exterior. Vulnerability. Not because someone tried to hurt him. Men in his position always had enemies. But because survival tonight had depended entirely on a woman nobody else in this room respected enough to notice. Near the hallway entrance, security suddenly restrained the fleeing guest beside the kitchen doors. Gasps rippled through the ballroom as phones quietly lifted. Higher. The man protested loudly, sweat visible along his forehead now. Adrian recognized him instantly. Daniel Mercer, one of Whitmore Dynamics' senior financial advisors. A man who had attended private vacations in Aspen with him. A man who shook his hand 2 hours ago. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly. Betrayal always looked uglier up close. Nia watched his expression carefully. Not anger. Not fear. Disappointment. Deep and cold. Like watching glass crack from the inside. Then one of the security officers approached Adrian carrying a small silver packet sealed inside a clear evidence bag. Sir, the guard said quietly, we found this in the service corridor trash bin. Adrian looked down at the label printed across the packet. Industrial neurotoxin. Fast-acting. Nearly impossible to detect in alcohol. Several guests stepped backward immediately. One woman covered her mouth. Another whispered a prayer beneath her breath. Adrian said nothing for several seconds. He simply turned slowly toward Nia Brooks while the entire ballroom watched. And in that moment, surrounded by money, cameras, and terrified executives, the most powerful man in the room realized the person who saved his life had been standing beside him all night, carrying a silver tray nobody bothered to see. Daniel Mercer kept insisting it was a misunderstanding, but nobody in the Whitestone Grand Ballroom believed him anymore. Not after the evidence bag. Not after the security footage pulled onto the giant projection screens near the stage. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly as one of Adrian Whitmore's tech directors connected the hotel surveillance feed. Suddenly, every billionaire, investor, and politician in the room found themselves staring upward like nervous jurors inside a courtroom built from crystal and gold. The footage rolled silently. Time-stamped 11 minutes earlier. Daniel entering the service bar area. Looking over his shoulder twice. Slipping something into a whiskey glass while the temporary bartender blocked the camera angle for exactly 4 seconds. For seconds. That was all it took to nearly change the future of a multi-billion-dollar company. Gasps spread across the ballroom in quiet waves. One woman slowly sat back down like her knees no longer trusted her. Another executive loosened his bow tie with trembling fingers. Daniel's face lost all color. You do not understand, he stammered. I was told this would not hurt him. It was supposed to scare him. Push him out before the board vote. Adrian said nothing. Somehow his silence felt colder than anger could have. He stood near the head table with both hands resting lightly against the chair in front of him, while security escorted Daniel farther toward the service hallway. The cameras from dozens of phones followed every movement. 1 hour ago, Daniel Mercer had been laughing over $1,200 bourbon with America's financial elite. Now people looked at him the way rich people always looked at failure. Like contamination. Nia remained near the edge of the ballroom beside a marble pillar, trying not to attract attention. But that had become impossible now. Everywhere she looked, eyes followed her. Curious eyes. Guilty eyes. Embarrassed eyes. Some of the same guests who laughed at her 10 minutes earlier now refused to look directly at her at all. Funny how quickly respect appeared once money and death entered the same sentence. Adrian turned toward the crowd slowly. The gala is over, he said calmly. Nobody argued. Chairs shifted immediately. Guests began gathering coats and purses with the nervous energy of people desperate to escape a room that suddenly felt dangerous. The orchestra quietly packed their instruments. Champagne sat untouched on silver trays. Half-eaten filet mignon cooled beneath chandelier light. Wealth always looked strange beside fear. Adrian's chief of security approached him carefully. "Police are on the way, sir." Adrian nodded once. "Make sure nobody leaves until statements are taken." Then his eyes moved across the ballroom until they landed on Nia again. She instinctively looked down first. Years of service work had trained her body before her mind. Do not hold eye contact too long. Do not appear confrontational. Do not make powerful people uncomfortable. But Adrian surprised her. He walked directly toward her instead. The room noticed immediately. Conversations softened. Even the waitstaff froze near the kitchen entrance. Adrian Whitmore rarely approached employees. People approached him. Nia's pulse quickened despite herself as he stopped only a few feet away. Up close, he looked different now. Less polished somehow. Like the illusion surrounding him had cracked under pressure. "What is your name?" he asked quietly. Nia blinked once. It was such a small question. Yet somehow it hit harder than all the others. Because it was the first time that night anyone important had asked who she was instead of what she did. "Nia Brooks, sir." Adrian nodded slowly, as if memorizing it. "How long have you worked here, Ms. Brooks?" "Almost 2 years." Adrian glanced around the ballroom briefly. Crystal chandeliers. Marble floors. Men worth hundreds of millions of dollars pretending they had not ignored her existence until tonight. His expression darkened almost imperceptibly. "And nobody noticed you before this?" Nia gave the smallest shrug. That usually depends on whether their glass is empty. For the first time all evening, Adrian Whitmore almost smiled. Not because anything was funny, but because the truth had finally entered the room. By midnight, the Whitestone Grand Ballroom no longer looked like a celebration. It looked like the aftermath of an illusion collapsing in slow motion. Police officers moved quietly between clusters of shaken executives, while hotel managers whispered nervously into headsets near the service entrance. The scent of expensive bourbon still lingered in the air, mixed now with tension and embarrassment. News had already begun spreading online. Somebody leaked footage from the ballroom less than 20 minutes after security detained Daniel Mercer. A blurry video clip showed a black waitress switching a billionaire's drink moments before a poisoning attempt was exposed. Millions of dollars in jewelry and custom tuxedos suddenly meant very little beside the raw shock pulsing through the building. Nia stood alone near the employee corridor, holding her folded apron against her chest. She wanted to go home. More than anything, she wanted the night to end quietly. But quiet had left this building a long time ago. 2 younger servers approached her carefully near the kitchen doors. Earlier that evening, they barely spoke to her beyond rushed greetings and table numbers. Now their eyes looked different. "Nia," one whispered softly, "are you okay?" She nodded automatically, even though her hand still trembled slightly beneath the apron fabric. The second waitress glanced toward the ballroom entrance. "You saved his life." Nia looked down for a moment. "I just noticed something." But deep down she knew it was more than that. Most people noticed danger. Very few interrupted power to stop it. Across the hall, Adrian Whitmore stood inside a private conference room speaking with detectives and legal advisors. Through the glass walls, his silhouette looked sharp and motionless beneath the cold white lighting. Men around him talked rapidly, waving documents and security reports, but Adrian barely moved. His thoughts remained somewhere else entirely. On the image of a young waitress stepping between him and a poisoned drink while an entire ballroom mocked her instincts. One detective closed a folder and sighed heavily. "You were lucky tonight, Mr. Whitmore." Adrian finally looked up. Lucky. Strange word. Luck sounded random. What happened tonight was not random. It was human courage wrapped in a black service uniform nobody respected enough to notice. Adrian loosened his tie slowly and glanced toward the hallway outside the conference room. Through the glass, he spotted Nia preparing to leave through the employee exit with her small canvas bag hanging from one shoulder. For reasons he could not fully explain, the thought unsettled him. "Excuse me," he said abruptly, cutting off one of his attorneys mid-sentence. The room immediately fell silent. Adrian stepped out into the hallway just as Nia reached the elevators. "Ms. Brooks." She turned quickly, surprised to hear him call her name again. Adrian walked toward her alone this time. No security, no assistants, no cameras. Somehow that made him seem less untouchable than before. More human. Nia instinctively straightened her posture. Years in hospitality taught employees to prepare themselves whenever wealthy. Men approached unexpectedly. Adrian noticed the reaction immediately. That bothered him more than he expected. You were leaving? He asked. My shift ended 3 hours ago, she replied softly. Adrian almost nodded before realizing how absurd that sounded. 3 hours ago, she was serving champagne to people who ignored her existence. Since then, she had prevented his murder, exposed corporate betrayal, and become the center of every conversation in Chicago's financial world. Yet she still spoke like someone apologizing for clocking out late. Adrian glanced toward the elevator doors, then back at her. Do you have transportation home? Nia hesitated carefully. The train still runs this late. Adrian frowned slightly. At 1 in the morning? It is Chicago, she answered quietly. The city never really sleeps. Something in that answer hit Adrian unexpectedly hard. Maybe because for the first time in years he realized how different survival looked depending on which side of wealth you stood. One person ended nights inside penthouse towers behind private security. Another waited underground for trains after saving a billionaire's life. Adrian looked at her for a long moment before speaking again. Nobody should be taking the train home after a night like this. Nia gave a small, tired smile. Most people would not even notice. Adrian's expression tightened slightly. I am beginning to understand that. Rain had started falling by the time Adrian Whitmore and Nia Brooks stepped out of the Whitestone Grand Hotel. Chicago shimmered beneath the midnight storm like a city trying to wash itself clean. Taxi lights blurred against wet pavement. Sirens echoed faintly somewhere downtown. The cold wind pushed between skyscrapers with the sharp bite of November air, but neither of them spoke right away. A black SUV waited near the entrance while 2 security drivers stood nearby, pretending not to stare. Earlier that evening, those same men would not have remembered Nia's face. Now they opened doors for her with careful respect. Funny how quickly people learned manners when survival became part of the story. Adrian glanced toward the train station entrance across the street. Then back at Nia. You are not taking public transportation tonight. His tone sounded less like an order now and more like concern, awkwardly learning how to exist inside a man and used to expressing it. Nia adjusted the strap of her canvas bag on her shoulder. You do not have to do this. Adrian looked at her steadily. Actually, I think I do. For a second, neither moved. Rain tapped softly against the SUV roof while city lights reflected across the sidewalk like melted gold. Nia finally stepped inside the vehicle quietly. The leather seats smelled expensive. Warm air drifted from hidden vents. Everything about the interior reminded her how far this world existed from her own. Adrian entered from the opposite side moments later, loosening the top button of his dress shirt as the driver pulled away from the hotel. The city rolled past outside in blurred streaks of neon and rainwater. Neither spoke at first. The silence between them felt strange now. Not hostile, just honest. Adrian stared out the window for several moments before finally speaking. You said your father died because nobody listened. Nia nodded faintly. St. Catherine Medical Center. South Side. Her voice remained calm, but Adrian noticed the way her fingers tightened slightly around the apron folded in her lap. He worked maintenance there for 14 years. Somebody inside the pharmacy changed labels to cover stolen inventory. My father was given the wrong medication after surgery. Adrian turned toward her slowly. And nobody believed you. Nia gave a quiet smile without humor. I was 13 years old. Black. Crying. In a hospital full of adults protecting themselves. The words settled heavily inside the SUV. Outside, Chicago kept moving. People crossed intersections holding umbrellas. Restaurants closed. Trains rattled overhead. Millions of lives continuing without realizing a billionaire almost died 3 hours earlier because one waitress noticed melting ice. Adrian leaned back slightly against the leather seat. I built an entire company around predictive medical technology, he said quietly. Algorithms designed to detect human error before people get hurt. Nia looked at him for the first time since leaving the hotel. Adrian's jaw tightened subtly. And somehow tonight, the smartest systems in my company were useless compared to one observant woman carrying a tray. Nia looked down again. Technology only works if people care enough to pay attention. Adrian absorbed that in silence. Most people around him spent their lives trying to impress him. Investors praised him. Executives agreed with him before he finished speaking. But Nia Brooks talked to him differently. No performance. No fear hidden beneath fake confidence. Just truth. The kind rich men rarely heard because money insulated them from honesty. The SUV stopped briefly at a red light near the Riverwalk. Across the street, A homeless veteran sat beneath an awning wrapped in two thin blankets while crowds hurried past pretending not to notice him. Adrian watched silently as Nia reached into her small bag, pulled out a wrapped sandwich from the gala kitchen, and lowered the window halfway despite the rain. "Sir," she called gently. The man looked up in surprise. Nia handed him the food with a warm smile. "Stay dry tonight, okay?" The light changed green. The SUV moved forward again. Adrian kept watching her quietly. Earlier tonight, she saved the life of one of the wealthiest men in America. Yet she still carried leftover food for strangers in her bag like compassion was simply part of her routine. Adrian suddenly understood something uncomfortable. Power had taught him how to command rooms. But kindness like hers, that came from surviving rooms that never cared whether you existed at all. The SUV finally stopped in front of a narrow brick apartment building on the south side just after 1:30 in the morning. Rainwater dripped steadily from rusted fire escapes while the old neon sign from a closed laundromat flickered weakly across the street. This part of Chicago never appeared in financial magazines beside men like Adrian Whitmore. No glass towers, no rooftop parties, just exhausted people trying to survive another week. Nia reached for the door handle quietly. "Thank you for the ride." Adrian looked out the tinted window at the aging building entrance with peeling paint and dim hallway lights. "You live here?" Nia nodded once. She did not sound embarrassed. That caught his attention immediately. Most people around wealth either apologized for having less or lied about having more. Nia did neither. She simply existed honestly inside her reality. Adrian stepped out of the SUV after her despite the rain. One security driver quickly moved to open an umbrella, but Adrian waved him back. Water soaked lightly into the shoulders of his tuxedo while he stared up at the apartment windows glowing faint yellow against the dark sky. "Ms. Brooks," he said carefully, "I owe you more than a thank you." Nia adjusted her bag against her shoulder. "You do not owe me anything." Adrian almost laughed at that. "You saved my life. I did what anyone should do." Adrian's expression shifted subtly. "No," he said quietly. "Most people would have stayed silent." The honesty in his voice lingered between them for a moment. Somewhere nearby, a train thundered across elevated tracks with a metallic roar that echoed through the wet streets. Nia glanced toward the sound automatically. Habit. Adrian noticed that too. Years of private drivers and helicopters had made him forget what public transportation sounded like at 2 in the morning. Nia started toward the apartment entrance before suddenly stopping. Her eyes narrowed slightly toward the sidewalk across the street. Adrian followed her gaze. A dark sedan sat parked beneath a broken street lamp with its headlights off. Two silhouettes remained inside the vehicle, barely visible through the rain-streaked windshield. Adrian's security team immediately stiffened. One guard touched his earpiece. Nia's voice lowered carefully. "That car has been there since we arrived." Adrian felt tension return instantly beneath his calm exterior. Earlier tonight, someone tried to poison him inside one of the safest luxury hotels in Chicago. It would have been naive to assume the danger ended there. One security guard stepped closer. "Sir, we should leave immediately." But Adrian did not move right away. His eyes remained fixed on the sedan. The engine started quietly. Then, slowly, the vehicle pulled away from the curb and disappeared into the rain without approaching them. Nobody spoke for several seconds afterward. The city suddenly felt colder. Adrian turned toward Nia sharply. "You should not stay here tonight." She frowned slightly. "I will be fine." "You do not know that." His tone came out stronger than intended. Nia looked at him steadily. "Mr. Whitmore, I have lived in this neighborhood my entire life. Dangerous people do not suddenly appear because rich men finally notice me." The words landed harder than she realized. Adrian fell silent. Because deep down, he knew she was right. Women like Nia Brooks navigated danger every day, while men like him only panicked once danger reached their level of wealth. Rain slid down Adrian's forehead as he looked toward the apartment building again. Cracked windows. Weak locks. No security cameras. Earlier tonight, she protected him inside a ballroom full of armed guards and executives. Now she stood alone outside a building where nobody would come if something happened. Adrian made a decision before logic could stop him. "You are not staying here tonight," he said firmly. Nia opened her mouth to protest, but Adrian shook his head once. "This is no longer about me owing you." His gray eyes locked onto hers through the rain. Somebody tried to erase the only witness who noticed the truth. I am not letting them get a second chance. The drive back downtown felt different this time. Nobody spoke much inside the SUV. Rain rolled across the windows in silver streams, while Chicago drifted past, like a city hiding secrets beneath neon and concrete. Nia sat quietly beside the door, staring out at the streets she had known her entire life. Adrian sat across from her, one elbow resting against the leather armrest, replaying the night over and over inside his mind. Daniel Mercer, the poison drink, the black sedan outside her apartment. Every answer seemed to uncover another layer of danger underneath it. But what unsettled Adrian most was not the attempted murder. It was the realization that Nia Brooks had spent years surviving a world where people ignored women like her until something terrible happened. The SUV finally turned beneath a private entrance guarded by steel gates and armed security. Above them rose the Whitmore Tower, 63 stories of glass and power cutting into the rainy Chicago sky. Nia looked upward silently as the gates opened. She had served wealthy people before, but this was different. This was not luxury pretending to impress guests. This was wealth built to remind the world who owned it. Inside the private elevator, soft piano music drifted through hidden speakers while gold lighting reflected against black marble walls. Adrian loosened his soaked tuxedo jacket slightly. "You can stay in the guest suite tonight," he said quietly. "Security will monitor the building until we know who else was involved." Nia nodded once. "Thank you." The elevator opened directly into Adrian's penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire city, glowing beneath the storm like scattered stars. The space felt impossibly large and strangely empty at the same time. No family photos. No signs of children. No warmth. Just expensive silence. Nia stepped carefully onto the polished hardwood floor while a house manager approached immediately. "Mr. Whitmore, should I prepare the East Suite?" Adrian nodded. "And have someone bring Ms. Brooks dry clothes and dinner." Nia opened her mouth slightly. "You really do not have to," Adrian interrupted gently. "Tonight I almost died because somebody inside my company wanted power badly enough to poison me. Allow me to at least offer you food." His tone softened the words enough to stop her protest. 20 minutes later, Nia sat alone near the penthouse kitchen island wearing an oversized gray sweater from the guest wardrobe while untouched tea steamed quietly in front of her. The city lights stretched endlessly beyond the windows. She had never seen Chicago from this high before. From up here, the neighborhoods disappeared. Poverty disappeared. Everything looked equal from 30 stories above reality. Adrian entered the kitchen moments later after changing clothes. Dark slacks. Black sweater. Simpler now. Less billionaire. More exhausted man trying to understand how his life nearly ended. He stopped when he noticed Nia studying the skyline. "Beautiful. View, right?" Nia nodded faintly. "It looks peaceful from up here." Adrian poured himself water slowly. "It is not." She looked at him carefully. Adrian stared out toward the city lights for several seconds before speaking again. "You know what tonight taught me?" Nia stayed quiet. Adrian gave a small, humorless smile. "I built my entire life believing power could protect me." He glanced toward her. "But power did not save me tonight." "You did." The honesty in his voice changed the air between them. Nia lowered her eyes briefly. "I just paid attention." Adrian shook his head slowly. "No. You cared." Silence settled softly around them after that. Not awkward silence. Human silence. The kind built from truth instead of performance. Then Adrian's phone vibrated sharply against the marble counter. He glanced down at the screen. Unknown number. One unread message. Adrian opened it slowly. His expression changed instantly. Cold. Focused. Nia noticed immediately. "What is it?" Adrian turned the phone toward her. The message contained only one sentence against a black background. "You protected the wrong man." The penthouse suddenly felt colder after the message appeared on Adrian Whitmore's phone. Outside the glass walls, Chicago still shimmered beneath the rain. But inside the room, something invisible had shifted. Nia stared at the screen for several seconds without speaking. "You protected the wrong man." Simple words. Quiet words. Yet somehow they carried more weight than threats shouted across boardrooms. Adrian locked the phone slowly and placed it face down on the marble counter. His jaw tightened, but his voice remained controlled. Security traced Daniel Mercer's communications earlier tonight. He was not working alone. Nia folded her hands carefully around the warm tea mug. Do you know who sent it? Adrian shook his head once. Not yet. Silence settled between them again, but this time it felt heavier. More dangerous. Nia looked toward the city skyline through the towering windows. Maybe they are right. Adrian frowned slightly. About what? Nia lowered her eyes briefly before answering. Maybe I do not know who you really are. The words landed honestly, not cruelly. Adrian understood the difference immediately. Most criticism in his world came wrapped in strategy or ego. Nia spoke like someone searching for truth instead of leverage. Adrian leaned lightly against the counter. You think I deserved what happened tonight? Nia hesitated. Not because she feared answering. Because she understood how complicated people became once money and power entered the equation. I think men at your level make enemies for reasons ordinary people never see, she said softly. Adrian looked down at the dark marble floor for a moment. That is probably true. He walked slowly toward the windows overlooking the sleeping city. I spent 20 years building Whitmore Dynamics. Investors call it innovation. Business magazines call it disruption. His reflection stared back at him through the rain-streaked glass. But companies like mine do not become worth billions without stepping on people somewhere along the way. Nia watched him carefully. For the first time all night, Adrian Whitmore sounded less like a billionaire and more like a man exhausted by his own empire. Did you hurt people? She asked quietly. Adrian gave a small bitter smile. Not directly. That is how men like me sleep at night. The honesty of that answer surprised even him. Nia looked down into her tea. My father used to say the worst damage usually comes from people who never see the consequences themselves. Adrian closed his eyes briefly after hearing that. Because deep down, he knew exactly what she meant. Thousands of layoffs approved through polished meetings. Hospital contracts rejected because numbers mattered more than neighborhoods. Employees reduced to spreadsheets. Entire lives changed by decisions made in rooms where nobody knew their names. Adrian had always called it business. Tonight it suddenly sounded colder. He turned toward Nia again. Why did you save me? She looked genuinely confused by the question. Because someone was trying to kill you. Even after everything people like me have done to people like you. Nia held his gaze steadily now. If I let somebody die when I could stop it, then I become part of the same sickness. The room fell. Silent after that. Rain tapped softly against the glass, while somewhere far below, traffic lights changed over empty streets. Adrian looked at Nia Brooks, standing barefoot in borrowed clothes inside a penthouse she never imagined entering. And something inside him cracked quietly. Not pride. Something deeper. The belief that wealth automatically made him important. Because tonight the person with the strongest character in the room had arrived carrying a silver tray. Adrian walked back toward the kitchen island and picked up his phone again. Then, without warning, he deleted 3 upcoming merger meetings worth nearly $2 billion from his calendar. Nia blinked in surprise. What are you doing? Adrian looked at her calmly. For the first time in my life, he said quietly, I am trying to figure out how much of my success was built by ignoring people I should have listened to. Nia studied him carefully. Most powerful men apologized only when cameras forced them to. But this felt different. Smaller. Realer. Human. Adrian set the phone down again and glanced toward the city one last time. Tonight I survived poison, he said softly. But maybe arrogance was the thing actually killing me.